I'd like to call to order the workshop for the Lee County Board of County Commissioners. If everyone could find their places, please. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's August 1st, 2023, and the time is 1:33. And I'd like to call to order the workshop for the Lee County Board of County Commissioners. Today's topic is the second draft of the budget. And at this time, I'd like to recognize our County Manager, Dave Harner, for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After the June work session, we've incorporated a number of comments and comments that the board had given us. We've also included and updated the property value increase in this budget. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Pete to go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Dave, and good afternoon, Commissioners. So Dave did a good segue into the agenda, which is we will look at the changes since we had our first workshop on June 20th. We took input from the board at that time and incorporated it into this the second draft. Also, the July 1st final tax base came out from the property appraiser, so we incorporated that as well as a pay adjustment for Board of County Commissioners employees of 5%. We also want to talk about, at the same time we're budgeting, we're monitoring reserves, we're also cash flowing a lot of damages and repairs from Hurricane Ian. So this is a very unusual year that we're in. So we're having to cash flow as much of that without hitting our line of credit, which is a variable interest rate and is in that 5% range now. So we prefer not to pay interest until we absolutely have to. We'll talk about some of the internal loans that we've done in order to, and the internal loaning process that we do to effectuate cash flow and to cover expenses for the recovery until we get full reimbursement from FEMA, and we're confident we'll get full reimbursement. We did for Charlie, and we did for Irma, and we will for Ian, and we have for all the other hurricanes. And we'll go through kind of where we are with the FEMA reimbursement. I'll go through the 5-year forecast of the general fund, which you see every year, and then the timeline for the rest of the budget development and public hearings. So the tax base June 1st for the general fund for countywide was 5.22%, and that the final tax base came in a little higher, about 1.5% higher. And then you can see for our 5-year modeling, we're still using the projections from the state estimating conference that was held in March. So this is the general fund. Key here is that we've included a pay adjustment on the board side. We've incorporated all of the requests from constitutionals as well as BOCC departments and our jointly funded expenses. So you've seen this graphic many times. So this kind of shows you where we are and where we'll stand as we're projecting expenses now through the end of 2024, which would be September 30th, 2024. So our millage rate and the 6.6% increase in the tax base. So we have revenues of $619 million and expenses of $635 million. So we're a little out of balance there, not unexpected considering the year that we're in with Hurricane Ian and recovering from that. And so we have a gap of about $16 million. Our undesignated reserves were around $94 million, and we made an adjustment to that. So in May, when Congress was in the debt ceiling negotiations, there was a concern that Congress would pull back American Rescue Plan funding, ARPA funding. And so we came to the board and we requested a reallocation of some of those remaining funds. And the major adjustment being that a legitimate expense for ARPA funds was public safety and in particular EMS salaries. So we reimbursed ourselves for our EMS salaries. That's called presumptive public safety during the COVID emergency. And that added $24 million into our reserves to come up with an adjusted reserve number. We held back about $2 million for septic to sewer. We have some outstanding requests to the state that will require a match, so we've held back about $2 million. So you have an adjusted reserve of $118 million. You see here the mid-year adjustment for the sheriff that the board approved this morning. So adjusted to about $111 million. Apply the gap or deficit. So our adjusted reserves are about $94.5 million. Each year, the constitutionals come forward with capital requests, the majority of that being the sheriff's office. And so after we apply that, we have final ending reserves at September 30th, 2024 of $81 million. It's a little bit below your $85 million that you want to maintain, but not much. And I just want to reiterate that your reserves at the end of 2023, September 30th, are $110 million. You can see there on the line. So one thing that I haven't done, or we haven't done, is the reserve number other than the ARPA adjustment to pay for EMS salaries. We have not done anything to adjust our projection during the year of that $94 million. And we have revenues that are coming in much better than they did last year, and last year was a record year for a lot of our revenues. And then we have some that aren't coming in as well, primarily due to the hurricane. But I haven't spent a lot of time trying to adjust that. I don't know exactly where we'll come out after the year-end close. I think we'll be good. But a suggestion that we're making of the board is that we close out the year, see where we are with our ending reserves, and then if we're where we thought we'd be or even better, we can make some additional decisions there. And what I would suggest is that we hold that transfer of capital to the constitutionals during the first quarter until we find out exactly where we came out with reserves, and then we can make that transfer afterward based on that evaluation. And you can see this is that $13.3 million from the previous page. We still have a debt payment on sheriff's radios, and that'll have to be paid regardless, no matter what the timing is, because that's a debt payment. But then the sheriff has other capital requests of $9.4 million, the clerk $2.3 million of revenue replacement, and then the supervisor elections $240,000 for express vote machines for the presidential primary. So what I'd suggest, a strategy that we employ, is we hold off on the transfer of as much of that as possible until we know exactly where we are. And I think we'll be fine, but it's just a backstop in case something happens that we did not anticipate.
Pete, I have a question real quick at this point. So we talked about the capital request for the constitutionals. What about the capital dollars that we typically set aside through the budgeting process through the growth increment fund?
So we've suspended the growth increment funding in this model, and I'll show you in the future that we'll probably have to suspend it for a couple of years just until we kind of get out of this trough that we're experiencing due to the hurricane. But you know, one thing the board had a lot of foresight last year when you not only budgeted for 22-23 capital, but 23-24, you did 2 years worth for those capital projects that do not have a dedicated funding source. And those are primarily parks projects, water quality projects, EMS projects. And so you did 2 years of that, so we're good through 23-24. You'll see in the modeling later, one thing that we don't have coming anytime soon is some new capital money, and unless things change or we do better as far as our revenue forecast than we're anticipating at this point.
So by us not putting the GIF though towards the capital projects that we traditionally put it towards, I agree with it from a finance standpoint, right? It helps make the math work better. But I guess my question is, do we know what the consequences are? Are we going to be behind on any major capital projects or any major road projects by not doing this?
No, we're working at this point. I don't think so. We're working closely with DOT, and our anticipation would be is that if there would be an impact, we will push that impact out to after the suspension of the growth increment funding.
Okay. I certainly appreciate the work you've done this year to talk to the constitutionals about their capital request. And I think, as we go into coming years, as we look at, us making some sacrifices on not transferring money for capital projects on the budgets we have control over, definitely would appreciate any shared adversity from the constitutionals too in their request for capital. If we can all kind of understand that it's just going to be a couple weird years until things shake out financially from the hurricane. May not need to go for everything over the next couple of years.
Okay, and we will relay that message, absolutely.
Okay.
So that gives you a kind of a synopsis of where we expect the general fund to end up and the reserves, final reserves. I do want to talk about all of the, whether it's cash flow, revenue losses, local matches that we're going to have to pay for to state and federal reimbursement of our hurricane expenses. We have submitted a lot of applications to get reimbursement and much earlier in the process than we have in years past. And we've submitted a lot of applications for funding, whether it be cash flow or revenue losses. I'll just go through a few. I'll go through this list fairly quickly. Of course, we received FEMA and insurance advances of about $62 million. That's never happened before, so that was a good thing, and that really helped us out, particularly with solid waste and paying for our debris removal, because we've spent about $130 million on that, and that's all been cash flowed internally. We've submitted for a FEMA loan of $5 million that has a potential to be written off. We're in contact with FEMA on that. There's some back and forth about wanting more information, and we're having that dialogue. We were approved for a state revolving loan of $25 million. That was approved, and right now we're working with the State Department of Commerce on the language for the loan agreement. There are some issues about parity with our other debt in the general fund to make sure that we don't constrain ourselves as to our ability to access our other debt instruments in the general fund. And so we're having those discussions with the state currently. We have the Bank of America line of credit, $150 million. That is untapped as of this point. But that does have a variable interest rate, and we're trying to get through this with paying as little interest as possible. Even though interest is reimbursable by FEMA, it takes a long time. And then also during the state legislative session, the state appropriated about $350 million for a number of uses relating to Hurricane Ian and communities recovering from Hurricane Ian, and one of those was cash flowing your reimbursement from FEMA. So getting cash flow in order to pay all of your costs, and then once reimbursement came from FEMA, then we would remit that to the state. So we've put in requests of $275 million for that. Yesterday was the deadline on that, and we had that in plenty of time. Revenue losses during the same legislative session, the same bill. There's a category in there for revenue losses. We have submitted to the state $75 million of revenue losses for reimbursement. $25 million of that $75 million you see is for property tax revenues. And what we did is we took the state revenue estimating conference projections for our tax base increase in August 2022, which was before the hurricane. And then we took what our tax base ended up being from July 1st. And then that delta we attributed to, that was the loss of revenues due to Hurricane Ian. And property tax revenues about $25 million. We feel fairly confident with that number because if you look, we were the epicenter. If you look at Collier and Charlotte County, they both had increases this year in the 17, 18, 19% range. And we were at 6.67. Then there were tax rebates that the property appraiser certified and the tax collector gave for property taxes that were paid this year by homeowners and for October, November, December if their homes were uninhabitable uninhabitable, they received a tax rebate for that. We know that number is $5.8 million, and again, the state had a bill this year in order to reimburse communities for those certified rebates, and we don't know the process yet, but our request is pending on that. We have a few, just some minor non-reimbursable costs by FEMA of $2.2 million, and then during the special legislative session in last December, the state put aside a fund to fund local matches for the county's portion of its expenses. So for a portion of the storm, FEMA reimburses 100%, then it goes down to 90%, sometimes 85, 80, 75. And the difference between that percentage that FEMA reimburses and 100%, that difference is split between the state and the county equally. And we believe that our estimate right now is that will be about $18.2 million. The state has committed to providing that local match, just as it did with the bridges that are being rebuilt. So I know that's a lot, but that shows you everything that we have submitted and all of this attempt to recover as much revenue losses as possible and to cash flow as much reimbursement or expenses before we were reimbursed, better said. Are there any questions on that? All right. The state revolving loan, we do want to effectuate that, and we want to max that out. That's a 0% loan. FEMA reimbursement, this is just the status, and I think we're in very good shape. We've worked really hard to get our project packages and our reimbursement packages to the state, and then it goes to FEMA as quickly as possible. And so we only have one inspection remaining. The difference between Irma and Ian was Irma was primarily a debris storm. So it was almost solid waste debris cleanup expenses. We had very little damage to facilities. This storm, about half's debris and half is actual damage to county facilities. So we have a lot more projects that we're submitting for reimbursement. But on the debris side, we've submitted to the state 0 to 30 days, 31 to 75 days. We are days away from submitting the last big package, 75 plus days for debris pickup. And once that happens, the state reviews it, then it goes to FEMA. At that point, it's a little bit out of the county's hands and the county's control. I don't expect any kind of significant reimbursement till 2024. Just as a barometer, after Irma, we didn't receive significant reimbursement for 2 years. Then other projects obligated or in FEMA processing, $33.5 million. Other projects pending FEMA completion DDD is damage description and dimensions. It's a whole package that has to be put together for each repair that you're doing at a facility. And then other projects that are pending county internal processing, $7.9 million. So we're in good shape as far as completing all the voluminous documentation that we have to provide to the state and to FEMA and getting that submitted. And at that point, it's just a matter of waiting on them to process it. They do ask for further information, requests for information, and we respond accordingly. So like I said, I believe we are at the end of paying Crowder, Gulf, and Thompson for debris cleanup. The weekly summary I send to you on a financial summary, we've spent $130 million, and I think that's pretty close to being the end, and why we're able now to get all our invoices to the state and FEMA. But we've cash flowed a lot of that internally, and we will continue to do that as much as possible before hitting interest-bearing debt instruments. And this just shows the interfund loans. Some of them don't have anything to do with Ian, but all the ones in solid waste do. We've done some loans between solid waste sub-funds of about $41 million, and then we've also loaned about $10 million from the library fund. That says library operating, but it's library operating and capital, so there's a significant amount of capital money in the library fund that's not being used now. Either we're waiting to start a project or no projects have been planned. So we want to do short-term loan from there that will be repaid in full, of course, once we get reimbursement. So, Commissioners, as I talked about, where we're going to be with reserves, we have a 5-year forecast model that we show the board each year for the general fund. We have this for the other major property tax funds also. And I don't want to get any of this in detail, but I want to show you the assumptions we've made so you can kind of see what happens to reserves as we go forward in the short term, and then what happens after that. And all these you'll see we dip down a little bit in reserves, probably lower than we're used to, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. It comes back up as we grow out of that deficit, and also as we repay the debt we have in the general fund. We're in the last 3 years of very high debt environment in the general fund, $15 million of payments each year, but after October 1st, 2026, we'll have no more payments. So here's, I think what's salient and key in this model is what we did is you can see the 6.67%, and you can see from the prior page, at the end of 2024, we're looking at a little less than 85 million, about 81.2 million. Then what we did is we put in the Revenue Estimating Conference's March estimation of annual property tax base increases for the next 5 years. And so you can see we go from 81 million, we dip down to around the $60 million range for a couple years, and then we come right back up. So what's happening during those 2 years is you're finally paying off all your debt, so you'll have zero debt in the general fund, and then you're growing out of that deficit. So we can run various models, different models that you can come up with as many iterations of this as you want to. But what we thought we'd show you is, okay, instead of next year, the Revenue Estimating Conference says 7%. Actually, it ends up being 10%, which I don't think is all that unreasonable, because I can't imagine that our tax base increase would be any lower next year than it is this year, because we've just had so much activity post January 1st. So you can see what that does to your reserves as you start at 81.2, you dip down to 72, and then you come right back up. So what that would allow you to do would be to reinstitute your growth increment funding quicker, and so you grow out of this much quicker. And it's just a few percentage points can have a large variation in these models. And then another model we thought we'd run is, okay, say we'll use the Revenue Estimating Conference estimation from March, but what we'll do is we'll hold expenses flat next year. So we'll have flat budgets. And we've done that before. We did that during COVID. It's difficult. It's not easy to do, but we've done it before. Again, you dip down into the 70 millions, and then you bump right back up. So these are just a few of the models. I think we'll run these as we go along to see, as conditions change, if any of this changes significantly. But I think, what this shows, the key to this is that, yes, we will grow out of that deficit. Yes, we will pay off our debt, and that will help. But for a few years, we'll dip down a little bit before we come back up. Again, we're going to be tight on new capital. We've got lots of capital money that we've collected over the years to pay for projects that are in the hopper. But for new capital, we'll be tight for a couple of years, and we have no new positions in the budget for this coming year, except those positions that are budgeted, that are paid for with special revenue, like all of the permitting reps for the permitting we're doing post-EN.
Makes sense. Pete, Commissioner Ruane has a question.
Sure, Pete. So all your models are obviously anticipate your projections, but none of them take into consideration any EN financial support if we were to receive a state loan and receive that and that become a grant. Obviously, your models change dramatically and the cash flow is dramatically impacted. So it's really helpful that you put together these EN support, because many of these items can contribute to the deficit and/or put us back in the red, in the black.
Yeah.
So yours is the worst-case scenario with no money obviously allocated to it on the Ian support.
Right, I believe so. And, and I don't know where we'll end up with property taxes.
Right.
But we may end up very well if we get that $5.8 million reimbursement. I don't show it in here, but that could be coming soon. So this will change as we go along. And that's why, we just need to be more fluid and flexible this coming year, I would suggest, in order so that we can adjust as conditions change.
The second thing, Mr. Chairman, I did ask for a copy of all the reserves, and I would suggest that if Pete hasn't sent it all to you, that it's available to you to look at, because Pete's enabled us to manipulate cash flow where we haven't had an interest expense, and we continue to have some pretty plentiful of reserves when you look outside the general fund. So those are just, I found it to be very helpful information, so I wanted to share that with y'all. Thanks, Pete.
So, Commissioners, the upcoming workshops, August 15th, and what we'll provide there is based on any discussion today if you want to see anything different. But if not, we'll be having a workshop on the 15th anyway. So, but it may be very short or not have to go to a final draft. And then our public hearings, September 5th and September 19th. And I'm available for any questions that board members may have.
Commissioners, what questions do you have at this time? No? All right. Anything else you guys would like to see included in the budget or done to the budget that hasn't been done?
That's exactly what I asked. Thank you.
Looks good. Yeah. All right. Mr. County Manager, short and sweet. I'll send it back to you. Oh, yeah, Commissioner
Thank you,
Pinnick.
and congratulations again, another good day, and thank you, Pete, for a great presentation. And this shows, though, as you see these numbers, you're looking back 5-10 years ago, what the county's been doing, our process, and going forward, there is a light in the tunnel. We have some obstacles coming up, and I'm sure things will happen over the next few years. It's going to make changes. Hopefully, we don't have any natural issues that's going to affect us, either weather or Mother Nature. But anyway, our process works. So again, thank you, Dave, and congratulations to you and your job and the new team.
Thank you.
All right. Anything further, Commissioners? All right, Mr. County Manager?
I think the only question we have is based on the fact that there's no changes to this presentation. Do you want to come back for a final, or are you okay just to move forward to the public hearings?
At this point, yeah, I don't see anything that we would discuss at another final workshop that we didn't discuss today. Commissioners, what are your thoughts?
I'm fine with just going right to the final.
Me too.
What is the right number for reserves? And I think we've addressed that and so on and so forth. We've changed it based on needs and so on and so forth. In the back of my mind, I'm always thinking about what if, that type of thing. What should that number be? I don't think we'll solve it here, but, the reserves here, the reserves back in 18 and 16, 17 was 120. We don't see that number coming forward. So not going to make it up here, but in my line, when I look at budgets and stuff like that, the reserve component, potentially concerning things going forward is always an issue. But I think we got much more clarity now.
Mr. Chair, if you will, having gone through a Category 5, I look at where we are today.
Absolutely.
At $81 million, and there's an awful lot of, if you look at the worksheet on the Ian financial support, opportunities that are here. When those get filtered into cash flow, if you do $5 million from FEMA or 25 from the revolving loan, that's another $30 million. It basically makes all that red go black. So I just think, considering we just went through the worst possible scenario, we've been through a lot.
I'm a worst case scenario guy. I'm always playing for the worst case.
But we just took a Category 5 on the chin, and we're still standing where we didn't have to go to Tallahassee like Fort Myers Beach to say I can't pay my bills. We're cash flowing $132 million worth of expenditures out of different reserves and manipulating
The only certainty I have is that it's not the last hurricane we'll see. Hopefully it is, but it's not the last one.
I commend Pete and staff. You've done a great job in everything you've been able to do, and quite frankly, I know that anything's possible, but I think we're in great financial shape.
Well done.
I think, I think my thoughts are, I'm really happy with what we've seen here, what we've been shown here. I think it's a good plan for this upcoming year, especially in light of everything that's been presented to us, all the different considerations. And yes, we're all praying that even the extra Hurricane Ian help comes through, because you're right, that certainly would even make this picture look better than it does. I think my only concern is, and it's really not anything that can be fixed, I just put it out there because I want it to be on people's mind, is just, again, continuing to make sure that we keep up with our capital projects, all of them that need to be built. Look, the roads are going to continue to get crowded, more and more crowded. People are going to continue to move here. We've seen that, honestly, if anything, a lot of people realized where our area was after the hurricane, and some people are looking at it as an opportunity to move here now. So, as more and more people move here, we're just going to continue to be pressed to build more and more infrastructure to serve those people. And I just think we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. I mean, I understand what we did this year, and I think it makes a lot of sense, but let's not do it for too long, that's all.
I agree. I think where we have the opportunity is there's so many potential opportunities in front of us to enable us to stay right on plan and not lose a step at all. When you really look at the support that's available to us, it's really going to come down to us and what we achieve in the legislative session.
Yeah. All right, well, if there's no further comment, then, Mr. County Manager, you have all you need?
Yes, I do.
All right, if there's no further business before us, then we're adjourned.